So we just wanted to give you a brief overview of roles and goals because we know that there are lots of people who are new to CLLS on this call, and there are lots of people who have been around in CLLS for a while, but who might want a refresher because some of the roles and goals details have changed. So here's what we're going to talk about today. The first is, why do we do roles and goals? We're going to talk about some resources, give you some tips about using it, talk about a topic that was really in demand about mapping goals, talk about using roles and goals in ESL, using roles and goals in group instruction, some curriculum ideas, and when we need your information updated. So why roles and goals? We always are seeking for a way to document achievements of learners in CLLS programs. And roles and goals is a way to document those achievements in a way that's really learner-centered as the focus of CLLS philosophy really is as well. Roles and goals can demonstrate achievements for learners, which is the primary audience, to say, look, you've made this progress, and offer an opportunity to reflect on that progress. It's also a way to document and demonstrate achievements to tutors so they can see that their learners are making progress. And it's a way to demonstrate achievements to your stakeholders and to the state library and the legislature. One thing about roles and goals that's also important to note, and I've really been thinking about this a lot because we've been reviewing your final reports, is that roles and goals do play a fundamental part in the definition of an adult learner in a CLLS program. So in order for you to count an adult learner, that person has to have completed an intake interview, been assessed, and be receiving instruction. And that person has to have established one or more literacy goals. We'll talk about this in groups, but in general, if your library is offering something like digital learning classes, basic digital learning, the folks who attend those classes don't count as adult learners unless they meet your local criteria, which you may set as a reading level, unless those people have gone through some form of an intake and assessment and have established a goal. So when we're looking at final reports, it's really important. We want 100% of your learners, or as close to it, to have established a goal. We did a survey and you told us some important things about roles and goals. And even though there were a lot of different responses, the most popular responses for what works with roles and goals are, it's a system that provides information that makes it easy to focus on what learners want. It provides helpful information for tutors and for instruction, and it gives you data and stories. But commonly, you guys all share that you have certain common challenges. One is getting tutors to report goal information, knowing how to track your data, and knowing what to do with goals that don't fit. One of the really good comments we got on this survey is that roles and goals reminds tutors that racing through books is not the goal. Meeting real life needs is what the goal. So we heard from most of you that roles and goals is definitely or mostly effective in documenting learning for learners in your program. And we also heard that you wanted to know how it could work for decentralized programs and that you wanted more training on the challenges of roles and goals. So today we're going to listen and hopefully get some additional information. More generally, you also told us that you want support for tutor training, using data, and budgeting for your program. I want to add one more thing before I turn it over to Allison, and that is that roles and goals isn't everything. Some of you suggested that we collect narratives about learner achievements, that we collect other documents. Your program can collect all of these things, and I encourage you to do that. Learner portfolios and other evidence of learner achievements are really, really important. Roles and goals just happens to be the thing that you report to the state. We want it to be useful information in your program, but it isn't the only thing it isn't the only thing you can do. You can keep other records, like a folder for learner achievements, for like a portfolio, or even test scores. So Allison, I'm turning it over to you.
Great, so I can share my screen, talk a little bit about the new website. And so I'm going to just replace the current share so you don't have to do anything, Bev. So as many of you have probably already seen, with some of your colleagues from the field, we did a lot of work creating this new website. So I'd like to thank everyone who helped on this project, Georgina, Carrie Scott, Lily, and let's see, Cassandra. I think Stephen from Brawley is no longer with us. And so a lot of help. I really appreciate everybody's work on this. And one of the tabs that we ended up putting together is a measuring success tab. And so this is there to help us kind of like locate some of the different information that we need to collect some data, and then particularly get into like roles and goals resources. And this is pretty similar to the roles and goals page that was on the old website that some of you may remember, where we talk a little bit about roles and goals, introducing to the a framework. We move into some roles and goals resources, and here you'll actually see the introduction to roles and goals, an FAQ, some guidelines. What's really important is that 24-25 roles and goals update, which I think was from Sabrina. So thanks if you're here, Sabrina. We have roles and goals mind map. So we'll talk a little bit about that in a few slides. And then some resources for collecting evidence and indicators of achievement, some guides to creating a learner portfolio, and then this updated informational webinar from Randy Weaver, who talks about the roles and goals process. So you can actually watch that. I believe it's about an hour long. So we've updated some of these resources. And then we get into the roles and goals curriculum. And this has also been updated to reflect the updates to the roles and goals that were made for 24-25. So we still have linked to that curriculum project that was worked on a few years ago, led by Randy Weaver, and where he worked with quite a few folks from the field and who put together these really great curriculum resources that we did see in the survey. Quite a few of you are using, which is good news, and find them helpful. So let's see. The one thing that's changed is the other goals section. So all of the goals that we no longer include on the 24-25 roles and goals updated sheet, I moved down to an other goals section so that you still have access to those and you can still identify them as goals, which we'll talk about for the next few minutes, but you can also still access some of the curriculum that's at the lesson plans that are attached to it. And then if you'd like to read a little more about the family literacy evaluation framework, that information is also there. And one thing that I skipped from above is a sample data collection form that was inspired by Diane Shimoda's data collection sheet from Diane is from the AK Smiley Public Library. And so this is there to help track learner, tutor, demographics information, some roles and goals, and the roles and goals information. And so I can always help walk you through that sheet, but it's just there as like just to get started.
Allison, I
So,
put links to all of these things in chat, and Diane, thank you. You've uploaded, I updated for the new roles and goals.
oh,
Um,
great. So, do you want to share the,
yeah, hang on. I'm just accidentally closed it, and now I'm going to reopen it.
oh, perfect.
Um, okay. Is that, once again, am I in the right view? That's a good question.
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so anything on this slide, Allison, you want to do?
No, I might just so this is the sample data collection form I just mentioned that was based on Diane's really great worksheet she uses to track data, and just to highlight that in this text here, and which is taken from the website, we just highlight that programs are still responsible for selecting your own data collection process or platform. And so this is just there to help in case you decide to go the manual route where you're collecting data through Excel. But there are other options as well. So this form is not required. And so now we're going to jump into using roles and goals with learners. Um, I think at least roles and goals starts from the minute you work with the learner because every interaction that you have with somebody, you're learning something new, right? And when we're working with learners, we're in a lot of different ways learning about what's important for them, about their life. And this starts at the intake assessment early meeting. When you're trying to even just set up these meetings, you're really learning a lot about who they are, what skills they have, where they might need help, even if you're not really doing that like formal assessment or intake yet. And so I think these all fall into the roles and goals conversation, even though some of us do have that direct roles and goals conversation with our learners. And so I always like to mention that, every time I'm meeting with someone, I'm just like keeping track of like what's important for folks. What is happening, what's happening that I could be helpful, that I'm seeing that maybe we didn't talk about or have talked about, and listening carefully to this and taking notes, maybe not in that moment, but kind of like storing them someplace, and after the end of the session, taking notes, because I think ultimately my perspective is connection first. And if we're taking notes kind of like sidebar psychologist, that's a little intimidating. So I think a big part of like listening carefully and taking notes, and sometimes that's not in the moment, but trying to um, keep track of what we need, and noting it after, or if you need to take notes during the session, I think that's fine. But I just think that afterwards is a little bit better for having that conversation. And then we'll talk a little bit about using conversation starters later with the mind map. But sometimes like asking questions, tell me a little more. Yeah, that's my favorite when somebody says something like, yeah, I don't really like school. I was like, tell me a little more about that. And trying to figure out without asking, like, what are your goals? Without having to like directly ask in questions that could be a little off-putting, trying to dig in deeper about what people are saying and in the moment, and asking those follow-up questions to like really guide your conversation to get the information that you need, but also keeping it connection first based, where we're really trying to like build that connection so people feel comfortable, and really try to think about like how not to like add to the potential trauma some folks may have experienced from their educational experience that have led to where they are coming to our program at that moment. And I think on the previous slide, we never have to tell learners about roles and goals. We never have to use that language. We also never have to call learners adult learners, ESL learners. Those are all internal language for us because it's a part of the grant program. But at the learner level, and even tutor level, when we're working, we're really just trying to give them what they need and understand what they need as well. And we don't ever have to use like our own internal language for how we're working with, like when we're working with folks, because it really will mean nothing to a lot of folks in our program.
Yeah, Allison, thank you. It's always, if somebody comes in and they like, I want to work on spelling, you say, give me an example of like why that would be useful or how that's going to be useful in your life. So I'm going to go to the role map, um, and turn it back over to you, Allison.
Yes, I love the role map. This was like one of my favorite tools when I was working with learners. Not necessarily to use it together, but as a way to help me like organize my conversation with the learner. So I would always start with that question. Tell me about some things that you'd like to do that you're not comfortable doing now. I kind of change up that last point there because because I think sometimes it's more about comfort in some cases than it is about not ability. And especially when we're working with ESL learners, not always true, but I try to frame it as like, what aren't you comfortable doing now that you would like to do? And I think this is a great place to like help frame our conversation. So like and organize our notes when we're taking them so that we later can go back and uh, organize our thoughts and identify those goals based on the conversation. So I think one recommendation is never handing out the roles and goals list so that we kind of avoid it becoming a checklist and move to this like more informal conversation intake assessment so that we are more organically understanding like a person's like focus for their why they're here, why they're with us. And I'll pass it to Bev.
Yeah, sorry about that, Allison. I hit the wrong button. So mapping goals, this was one of the big questions that we got on this survey that we conducted. A lot of people asked, I need help mapping goals, or they asked the question, the goal my learner is working on is not on the list. The list is too specific. The list is too general. So one of the things I want you to know about roles and goals is we actually have simplified it for 2024 to 2025. And if you are a new CLLS coordinator, you wouldn't have known that information. But roles and goals is somewhat simplified and stripped down for this fiscal year. And the intention was for you to map specific goals into a broad goal. So somebody put on the survey, there used to be a goal for reading a harder book. They're not just read a book, but you can read a harder book and map that goal into read a book. So read a book is a big goal and a learner can set that goal multiple times. So read a book, read a nonfiction book, read a harder book, read a magazine, read a newspaper. All of those are in general reading material goal, read a book, newspaper, or magazine. So for each learner, they can report that goal set in different ways and made progress in different ways and achieved in different ways. You can report multiple achievements within a single goal for a single learner. You can report multiple goals mapped to a single goal area for a single learner. And that is sometimes something people don't quite realize when you are reporting roles and goals. If there is a learner X, and they read a book and they read a harder book and they also read a newspaper and all of those were goals, you can report those as 3 goals set and as many of them met for that person in the part of the roles and goals report where you're reporting individual goals. And the part up top where you're just reporting per learner, we just want to know how many of your learners set goals, how many of those total number of learners actually met one of their goals or more of their goals, and how many of your learners made progress. So you would never want the made progress and met to exceed 100%. So some of you are getting these comments back, but we do strive for 100% of learners setting a goal, and the part where you're reporting details, you can map goals to the general goal. That's why we tried to make those goals more general. We'll probably have some questions about that. Allison, I'm going to turn it over to you for using roles and goals with ESL learners.
Shanti has a question. Did you want to take
Yeah,
that
we can
now?
take questions. I just can't see them on my screen.
So Shanti's asking if a learner met the goal, read a book 3 times, re-reported 3 times, or once a year for the final report.
That's a great question. And if it's just reading a book at the same level, one time at those books. But if they explicitly said, okay, now I'm reading books, I want to read this new kind of book, a harder book. Like I've been reading adult literacy chapter books, but I want to read a book for book club, or I want to go out into the main part of the library and read an adult biography. That would be a new goal. So it has to be a little bit difference, I think, in substance and difficulty. So it's just not reading more books in the same series. Allison, would you add to that?
No, yeah, I agree. I think there should be like some kind of a increasing level or, step, up in what folks are working on to like reset that goal and work towards it, even if it might be in the same category. Diane asked, if we report increasing levels of reading for all of our learners, our total read a book set goal will be higher than the number of total learners. I think you can reset the goal, Diane, when somebody, if they read a book they meet that goal and they read a harder book and they meet that goal, you could reset that goal. So you'd have it set twice and met twice.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be reset and met 12 times in a year if your book club meets 12 times a year. But if their goal changes in substance or quantity, that's a judgment call on your part, but it can be reset within a year for a learner for sure. Were there other questions, Allison?
Yeah, Diane says, right, but if everyone meets it twice, then we'll have 200 set, met, read a book goals for 100 learners. I think that's okay, Diane, because we're not necessarily counting, in that case, we're counting goals. We're not counting learners. So I think that, I mean, what do you think, Bev? I think that's fine if you'd have 200 set met, even if you have 100 learners, because with the understanding people can map goals and then reset goals,
Yeah,
etc.
yeah, I agree with it. I mean, it sounds like it's kind of a boondoggle, but if it really is representing additional learning, additional goals being set, so I do think it's okay. One of the things I do think about roles and goals is I actually think that they're currently somewhat underreported, because people think they can only report one thing per one person. So when we hear people talk about the achievements of learners in their programs, we don't always see them reflected in roles and goals. And we wish you might report them more fully. That's my perspective.
Yeah, I hope that helps, Dan. And I have to check county opinions, what it looks like on there.
Okay,
Yeah,
Shanti, has a question, which is there's a discrepancy between the report from this year from last year. It does have the number of learners who set and met goals under each section. Will that change in the reporting this year? That's why we report only one goal set and met per learner. We think the form will look the same, but you should be able to report more than one goal in a category set per learner. I think people did do that this year.
yeah, we usually, for every goal, we report the number of set, the number of met, the number of made progress. Yeah, thanks for these questions. No, it's not, this is definitely one of those things that is not a straight and easy process. And there's a lot of gray area because, goals can vary from person to person. Um, so using roles and goals with ESL learners, the main, one of the main elements we use to identify ESL learners for, again, for the purpose of the CLLS program is based on what goals they have and what those goals are. So if an ESL learner, we would classify an ESL learner as somebody whose primary goals are speaking and or listening related, and we are primarily documenting those goals. I was messing with that adult mind map issue. And we're primarily documenting those goals in the under lifelong learner. We added one this year called improve communication skills. And in the hopes that it will be easier to track ESL learner goals for all the programs that have CLLS ESL funds for this year and next year. We also have one other area where you can report communication and communication-based goals, and that's build confidence speaking with or for my family. So we consolidated the other communicate effectively goals into this single goal, build confidence speaking with or for my family. So you have two options that we're hoping are general enough to capture the many different speaking and listening goals some of our ESL learners may have. Oh, thanks, Elisa. And and as a way to better report those goals on the final report and as you're working with learners throughout the year. Um, and in those two sections, you'll hopefully be able to capture most of its communication-based goals that learners have. And as like been kind of touching on, you can break most of these goals up into achievable small goals. And you may also actually see this if you're working in the lesson plans. And what I like about the lesson plans and the curriculum is at the end, it also kind of gives you a framework to how do you identify making progress? How do you work with learners to identify they've met a goal? And then maybe in the same conversation, we're going back and asking, to reset goals as we're figuring out if progress has been made or if learners feel like they've actually met that goal. And so as you're having your conversation with learners about a goal, like let's say maybe they would like to read. I remember having a learner who wanted to read a Stephen King novels because that was like she loved horror, and but I think we were still working at that time, working on like basic literacy skills like phonemic awareness and phonics and all of those skills. So that was a pretty big, I thought that was a pretty big goal to me. And we kind of worked together to identify like these small tasks, like we're primarily focusing on reading different kinds of horror related or scary, related short stories and slowly starting with reading passages, moving on to really short stories, and kind of like breaking up that small goal, that larger goal into smaller achievable goals so that we can, identify places that we're making progress, and but also like still make like get to that larger goal to ultimately read like Pet Cemetery, I think it was, which I love.
I was
And oh,
I
go
was
ahead,
going
go.
to say, Allison, that sometimes there are also things like the general communication and lifelong learner. It could be a goal like I want to communicate so I can use public transit. I want to communicate with the bus driver. I want to communicate with whatever it is. I want to be able to have a conversation with someone in a park. There are all these things we hear with these great anecdotes, but all of those are sometimes goals that somebody is working specifically toward. So sometimes they're work things like I need to give a presentation at work. Sometimes it's a parent-teacher conference, and you'll find those mapped in the family section. But learners and tutors can work to set concrete goals within that large goal. You don't move from not communicating to communicating, and you can report those multiple times. I would say use your judgment. Like every week is probably not another goal met for reporting purposes. It probably could be a goal met for tutoring, for a tutor to say good work, and for a learner to reflect on like what did I learn this week? What did I use? But think about you're not collecting this data all the time from tutors and learners. What are some meaningful goals that you can break down and then map to the larger goals and roles and goals? If that makes sense. I'm going to skip ahead to groups, Allison. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Um, so one of the issues we've been hearing from the field is like the challenge of, and
My
maybe
side.
my headphones may die, so you may see me take a second to take my headphones out. But um, so one of the challenges we've been hearing from the field is how challenging roles and goals is for small groups and even large classes. And part of this is the CLS framework has traditionally been primarily one-on-one focused, and then has over the years transitioned to small group settings, and then now with the introduction of ESL, we're seeing more programs offer large classes too to both accommodate like this like environment for English learning, but at the same time to accommodate interest because programs are growing. And so part of the suggestion that always works for me in my own classes is my first session is always like focused on goals, like what are goals, what are folks' goals, and really trying to dig down and give folks some practice in identifying goals and using whatever framework works for you, and that may be helpful to talk about goals in the session. And in roles, like like as you're working through your first session, I think you can definitely collect information from the group, both starting aloud, having that primer discussion, and then reviewing videos, like having people share their goals, using somebody's goal to like kind of like dig into and try to like work through the SMART goal model. And then transitioning to like a paper form where you're then asking folks to like kind of start documenting as best as they can their goals, and maybe going around and helping folks identify that. And part of this, I think, and here listed here, is this could be used as the assessment, an informal assessment of one's speaking and listening skills, an informal assessment of one's reading and writing skills later on if you do use a paper form, or as you're writing on the board. And so uh, kind of structuring a first session to be goal-based, to both collect roles and goals, um, and doing some informal assessment as a group, I think will end up satisfying those other requirements for ESL learner. So that's learners should undergo an intake assessment, set at least one primary goal that's communications related, and then you would meet all of those requirements during this first session, talking about goals. And then also understanding that this is challenging because people may come into the session at different times. And so sometimes I may take 5 or 10 minutes to work with somebody after class saying, hey, we did this. And uh, kind of work them through like the conversation in paper form if you can, just so that you have that on hand. And then what I do is I actually save those forms. I hand them out every few weeks, like, hey, this was your goal. Where are you at? Because actually it also kind of is fun with learning, and people laugh like, oh, I'm nowhere, or like, or and then we'll talk about how we've actually done a lot of cool stuff. So this one suggestion there. And then second suggestion, yeah, which I've already kind of jumped into, is continuing the conversation at each meeting. I think we know that setting, including learner reflection is a promising practice for sessions, and building, like at the beginning of our sessions, building our outcomes, and what we hope people will learn by the end of the session, and then helping learners reflect on what they've learned. And connecting it to their daily life, are all like best practices for structuring a learner-centered small group or class session. Um, and also kind of using that to figure out like what's challenging about this session, how you might continue the discussion next time, what went well, what kind of activities went well, what people loved, and using all of those feedbacks to just help keep making every session better and responsive to folks' needs. Um,
Yeah,
and
that's great, Allison. I think you covered it all. I'm just, because it's one conversation, I just moved the slides along. But it's a lot, it's learner generated, but also includes learner reflection and instructor reflection, praise, and guidance. So I think that more or less the last slide is just the curriculum. The ideas are available under the roles and goals page. And so if you've never used those curriculum modules, take a look at them, see if they're helpful to your students. And then the final just thing for those of you who are new is that roles and goals, how often do we update the information? It's actually reported to the state library only one time a year, but you may update your roles and goals information on your schedule. Often people do it monthly. And I know that one of the things we want to talk about with you guys is tutor training. How can we help tutors report more accurately? Generally, staff, there will be a general update with a learner every 4 to 6 months, and we've included sample forms on the website. So we know that you are interested in talking about collecting data in different types of program, talking about how to help tutors with reporting. So I'm just going to turn off the slideshow and get that off my screen and stop sharing, and we can stop recording.